Good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock p.m. on the dot Eastern Standard Time here in beautiful, it's getting less beautiful by the moment, Brooklyn, New York. My name is Max Cohen. I will be your host today for another episode of the MOCA Live podcast. Thanks for being here. We're psyched to have you. Joining me on the podcast today, as always, is to my immediate south, I suppose you could say. That would be the founder of the Museum of Crypto Art, Colborne Bell. Colborne, what's up? How are you?
I don't know if South works like that, but I'm good.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'm directionally challenged to begin with. I've had a tough time with East and West my entire life, but that's perhaps for another episode. Besides Colborne and I would like to welcome back to the show new member of our Three Timers Club. That would be the curator and Breezy Art founder and self-proclaimed indefinite metaverse resident, Eleonora Breezy. So, Eleonora, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you for having me. At least you don't have to have me on the private chat. You have.
Yes. So I guess the subtext to today's episode, which is all about criticism and curation, is 2 weeks ago, Colborne were on, just the two of us, and Eleonora was extremely active in the chat, and we ended up kind of me responding to her points and her responding to my points. And I think we both just agreed it would probably be easier to just do this live instead of responding to a chat box. So we're going to do just that. That should not sway anybody who's interested in having a conversation in the chat.
That should encourage people.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll invite you on the podcast. So speaking of that chat, that episode, I think we should start there because we ended up having this live call and response conversation. And let's just pick it up where we left off. So you had said in the chat something that I thought was not only very eloquent, but also very cutting, which is nobody is taking the responsibility of doing a critique. Everyone just reporting, interviewing, collecting. No, there's not only this way to really support artists and collectors, criticism and curation. And I am curious, just to begin us today, when you say that nobody is taking the responsibility of doing a critique, what do you mean?
It's a delicate, I think, topic and very broad topic. But what I meant, obviously nobody means very few, maybe it was just a little exaggerated. But even not in our space, even in the art world, contemporary art world, institutional, let's say, outside of Web3, it's already more and more difficult to have art critics and art critics. Yes, they're still there. It's pretty much always the same characters that have been there for a long time. But the homogeneous reactions of society and the world to everything, and therefore to art as well, doesn't really give space to art critique anymore. So I was considering that our space is even, accelerates all the phenomena that are happening in the art world, because everything is quicker, and if it's everything is at its maximum extension. It is very hard to find people and characters who in our space seems like responsibility of really expressing opinions on the art, which is the first little step of art criticism. That we can talk about art criticism, which I don't even, it's very complicated, but it is very, the attitude is very neutral all the time. And artworks and art projects are made for, certain goals, which do not necessarily include or need art critique. The answer needs to be very quick and very homogeneous. And that's why there is even not space for opinions. And it's very inconvenient to have an opinion on a space like this, if that makes sense. So that's what I meant, this, actual discussions about the art. And also, I would say the last thing it seems like we necessarily have to find this objectivity that everyone is talking about, maybe because we use technology, I don't know. But I would even start from there. Like, do we really need objectivity at any cost? I mean, maybe we need some subject, I don't know. Like, we don't need one subjectivity, we need more subjectivities, but maybe objectivity, which is impossible, we don't necessarily need that.
Well, it's very interesting. I want to return to this idea of like there is kind of no criticism in general in the art world, because I think the recent trend is this kind of like crowdsourced criticism, right? Not of art, but you think about Letterboxd as it relates to film, or Goodreads as it relates to like literature, where there's less of this kind of like ivory tower idea of criticism, but and what is coming in instead is kind of just the free flowing, free form opinions of people who self-proclaim as experts. And the reason they self-proclaim as experts is because they're even taking part in these discussions. And that seems like a very, obviously it's not perfect and it's corruptible, but it's at least a response, a critical response of a sort to kind of, I think, what was at one time a very gate kept kind of structure, right? You would have, Peter Wells or Peter Travers and like these like New York Times, Boston Globe, LA Times movie critics. And that's who everyone found their, movie criticism from. And now I think it's much more important, even I see when, I watch a film commercial, right? They don't just talk about the critical score on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that. They talk about the audience score, because it's much more about like crowdsourcing crowd opinions. We don't have anything like that in crypto art. I don't believe there's anything like that in the art world at large.
Yeah, so I don't think, okay, so what you just described, I think is generally very positive to have more voices. Again, what I think it's negative is to have zero voices. So, and this kind of, okay, so many times, like, I was, like either like judged or asked to be a taste maker. We even talked about this with Colburn, like taste maker. Like, if you want to be influential in the space and you want to be a taste maker, you collect the artworks. And I'm like, no. Like, why is that the only way to have a voice? Because you show that you are, like supporting artists and certain art projects by collecting. And this tells you a lot. Because if a taste maker is like called as such because they are collecting, then you understand immediately what is the main point of the entire space. So yes to many voices, and to maybe in the space we lack a little bit, but what you talked about, like opinions of generally like of people who hide behind the keyboard, I think we have that. But to for people who are more, let's say, on view and have the chance to speak to more people, to take a position and say, this is not going to be objective, this is very subjective, this even like this art style, this art like movement to me is this and this, because I feel, I see, because of this and that, because I my experience, my knowledge, and this. So again, our critique first of all is not to like kill and like step on artworks and artists. It is to give opinions, which I don't know. I just have the feeling that now we hate that, and the more we keep doing this, the less it's becoming like less and less human. And so I don't understand why. So for instance, when they were talking about like decentralized curation, and we could talk about decentralized art critique, which again it's not possible, but at least like to tend or to try to find new ways of art critique, I'm all about it. But what I see is completely the opposite. And so I was reading a very interesting article on Art Tribune, and like the difference between art curator and art critique. Even now in the art world, nobody wants art critiques anymore, because they're very like, yeah, they're very like, it's uncomfortable to have like your opinions stated. But art curators became very more like effective, practical. They do the job. But that's what it is in our space as well. That's why I always say, like, I don't like to curate like this. Like, you introduce an artist, you write a text, maybe you curate a drop, you take care of the sales, and then you curated an art project. And the art critic is going to sit on the art project, like contemporary art project, let's say like a digital art project, and they're going to describe and they're going to contextualize, and then they're going to say, oh, like, I love generative art, but I feel that in this moment it became a little bit of a trend, and at least half of it I would consider it decorative art. Already, if you say this, then the discussion that you cannot agree with me, but then the discussion that you bring up on like a certain genre or artist is so much more constructive than just be mute and accept it and do like support projects that do the genre because the genre is very successful. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So yeah.
I mean, there are a couple things that you mentioned that I want to like touch on, like, one of which is the nature of providing criticism to like a generative art project is a great example, right? If you have a project that has 1,000 holders, 5,000, 10,000 holders, and you try and criticize it, you're not just criticizing the artist at that point, you're an existential threat to everyone who holds that project. So you're de-incentivized in that way. And Coborn, I know you spoke about this a couple weeks ago with like generative art specifically. Like, you're not a coder, you don't have the computer engineering know-how. Not to put words in your mouth, but like, it's hard to have both the art historical or kind of like criticism minded lens and also have like the requisite technological know-how to make an educated kind of conclusion about the art that we're looking at. I mean, like, Coburn, the what do you think the role of criticism is in crypto art? And I'm not sure, you guys are both much, more prolonged crypto art members than I am. Like, was there ever a point at which there was criticism in the space, and what role might it have played then?
Okay, those are two different questions.
I think there were three different questions.
Yeah. Let's talk about the one that excites me the most, which was there ever criticism? I don't think there was criticism of the individual talents that people were bringing, but there was certainly criticism of where we were going, what we were trying to do together, what was our best foot forward. The whole reason that Robness was kicked off Super Rare was because people found the trash can to not fit under like a broad umbrella of art, right? And so I think people were playing around, they were poking, they were trying to examine what this new, very rough, amorphous idea of crypto art was and could be. And that definition increasingly, the ridges of it got more and more defined by the market coming in. It really just being about selling a JPEG. It really just being about generating FOMO. It's about how many editions you can sell as quickly as you can. And of course, any sort of long form discussion, any sort of like examination, any sort of hosting or demonstration or bringing works into a metaverse, any of the long form work was viewed as extraneous.
Eleanor, anything to add?
No, yeah, I agree. That was like the criticism, because criticism is such a broad word, and sometimes it's really like mistaken. It was a less criticism about the movement and the goal and what was happening, and then again, as I was saying, like, if then like taste makers are those who buy artworks, then you understand how the space just became. And there is no space for, yeah, exactly what Colburn said. Like, long discussions is inconvenient, and anything that could like bring up even, some, at least some salty kind of like exchange, not convenient, because there's not even time for it. And also, I mean, obviously art and the most contemporary art spaces always reflect society and what's going on actually very early, like even before it happens in society. And it is the same thing that it's happening in society. The answer is uh, homologated, homogeneous. It's the number of likes and appreciations by the masses. It doesn't matter. The discussion doesn't really matter anymore. But with art criticism, I mean, for me, the most important thing is, if you give your personal opinion because it's human, then it's actually the only way to give the tools to people to understand the art, because they can relate. Then they can say that they agree with you or they don't agree, and we can talk about it. But this complete detachment that we have from the art, as if this art now is even not made by humans, which is probably also true. It's like I don't know. It's very,
I want to add, this isn't a problem just in crypto art. Like
yeah.
I've been looking at more like film financing deals, and the number one thing they try and sell you on is the number of Instagram followers that each actor has. You know, it'll just be like a picture of the actor and then just how many followers they have. The next one, how many followers they have. It's like nothing about story, nothing about location or budget. It's just, and it's so trite and derivative, and that has seeped across like all generation of culture.
Well, and it reflects as well, I think, a general discomfort with like expertise that I think we see in all facets of life, right? We know, at least in the US, like it applies to like the medical profession, it applies to like the political profession, it applies to the economic profession. I think it applies to criticism as well. I don't actually know the um uh verisimilitude, right? That's a word, right? Verisimilitude.
It is a
I don't know.
word. I don't know
I
what it
don't know. I
means.
don't know the veracity. Just I don't know the truth of what I'm about to say. But my assumption with art criticism has always kind of been that, like, throughout the 1900s, say that you would have a piece get created, it would then get collected, and then the collector would hope over time that this piece gets criticized in a way that brings it into kind of the canon through contextualization, and then that would make it sought after by other art buyers. It would make it sought after by museums who are predominantly looking to generally like academic level criticism for their cue on what should be important, what is worthy of collection, with kind of at least some lag over the decades. It seems that now it's entirely like you were saying, Coborn, where the importance of an artwork is delineated not by its, academically stringent importance, but by how many people have seen it, how many people recognize it. It's, how many people are talking about it, etc. Um, and there's something here in the sense that, I think we are all, or most people are, in all these different artistic realms, they are gravitating towards information that is not traditionally critical. I'm curious, Eleonora, sorry, what do you think people are mistaking for criticism?
Well, criticism is always, I feel like, is often mistaken for bad. Like, it has a bad connotation, which, at least, like, I don't know. Also, I'm Italian. Criticism cannot have a bad connotation. It can only have like a constructive. It's like, this culture doesn't even exist without criticism. It's like we sit and we talk until tomorrow. Um, what is interesting also is that, I don't know. I think one of the main problems is that if I think about criticism, like from the 18th century up until the 80s, which is when it was powerful, because now again it's not powerful anymore. obviously I cannot think about applying that kind of criticism and like how it worked until now to our space. So that's not what I'm saying. But the ethos of that, which is mistaken for, I mean, an art critic is not someone who sits and says this is good and this is bad. Even what you just mentioned, like to make an artwork important, yes and no. It's more about almost like working in the contemporary times for the history, you know, like providing contemporary context for the future art historians to look back and find traces of what was going on in context, and then eventually that will make it important. And so also like in a space which is very new with new tools, it's also, I understand, like very difficult to okay, for instance, like many of the artists we don't even meet in real life. And so it's like it's very, you know, it's like it's art created, it's the art from the by the populations of the internet. It's very digital, we are a little detached. And so how do you create an art critique if you don't even have the chance to experience like the artist and the work in a certain way? There is a way, but it needs to be a new one. Because if you want to write an art critique piece as it was written like until 30 years ago, then it doesn't work, because it was coming from these critiques and curators meetings, you know, at like art exhibitions, and going through like discussions together. So we need to find new tools for that. And I think that everyone is very scared because we just look at that like old way of doing it. You know, like a few months ago, I even asked Chat GPT, do you have a contemporary way? Do you have a suggestion for a contemporary way of being an art critic? Because I want to be an art critic, but I don't want to be what it was, like what has been until now, because I think that it doesn't match anymore. So how, the question is not like, it's not really like what is mistaken. The question really is probably like how can you, you know, create a new way that of art criticism that mirrors what we actually are, I think.
Can I
So
can I
yeah,
share a
please.
tweet?
Yeah,
Huh?
please share a tweet.
Can I share a tweet that I think may or may not be relevant, but I would love everybody's insight. And I guess like, can you see it? Oh, it's off screen. And I guess
There
I'll
we
read
go.
it for everybody. It says, this is a crazy ass moment in Italian politics. Former Culture Undersecretary Vittorio Scarbi defends the girl who climbed John Bologna's Bacchus statue in Florence, miming a sexual act. It is a transfiguration. When art is truer than life, an amorous exaltation, no real man can compete with Cellini's Persis. A drunk girl performs a critical act, not an erotic one.
I know this guy is crazy.
That's it's heavy. Well, what are your
all
initial
to
thoughts,
say,
Omar?
all to just say, like, is this not like kind of the moment we're in, where just I don't, gosh, what is the I should get Society of the Spectacle, right? When everything is no longer the actual thing, but it's the idea of the representation of the object. So it's almost like nobody, and digital art fits in there so nicely, because, and it's the same thing as also these people that sell these invisible statues, or we're so far blown out past any idea of the thing or the technique, or so it makes it almost, I think, absurdist to begin to critique. And then there's all these, you know, words that have been put on top of it, whether it's, oh, you're just a hater, or you have bad vibes, or you know, you're like bringing people down. And it is all just a giant misinformation war, because at the end of the day, I think people know they're stuck. We're stuck in this thing that we don't particularly want to be in, and it makes us, for the most part, feel lonely, feel bad. and everybody is kind of looking for, even if it's momentary, some sort of positive escape.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think also people are they're less looking for a way how to think or a method on how to think, and they're looking for confirmation that the way that they're thinking is correct. And I know that like that's mostly what I get out of like reading movie reviews is I'll go see a movie and then read a bunch of reviews to say, oh, okay, I recognize this. That means that I was correct. Oh, I felt similarly about this. That means that something about like my experience has been validated. And I know that like when I was going through the Genesis collection and writing, what I probably at the time would have called criticism, but was probably more like just analysis generally. I was like, I need to stay really positive, right? My goal here is not to say good or bad. My goal is to say somebody's going to come to these pieces and want to find a way to confirm what perhaps their initial kind of aesthetic judgment was. This is good, and here's like a reason why this is good. Here's somebody else agreeing with me why this is good. I'm not sure that I have in my own writing done a great job of being critical. I've been critical, but I'm not sure I've been contextual. And I'm looking like I'm hoping that this is like a fact-finding mission as well, because I would like in my own writing to perform, I guess, the necessary task of criticism when criticism in the traditional sense is either irrelevant or like unworthy. Like I know we've kind of been dancing around this point, or maybe even like jumping in and then jumping back out, but like what does an ideally critical piece of information provide to the person in crypto art specifically who is taking that information? Is it supposed to confirm their point of view? Is it supposed to challenge their point of view? Is it supposed to just give them somebody else's lens into a way to think about the culture, about an art piece and artwork, etc.? Eleonora, what do you think?
It's the lens that you mentioned. It's the lens, and it's again, it is a tool to, when you filter, and it really is like the role of the artist, but then we know that you probably need someone who still helps the artist to translate to people. There is for me nothing better than to give a personal view and provide personal lens to other people, and I will love to be provided as well, because I am put in a position where I understand through a very human filter, and then I can decide. I don't need to be validated, but I can decide if, okay, like I agree with this point, or like I don't disagree, actually I think this and that. So by doing that, I think that what criticism provides is a human filter to put you in the position of starting your critical thinking. And then we can like discuss about things.
Hmm.
That's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really Colburn, please.
I mean, the only other point I wanted to make here is that, and this was surprising to me, but there were people out there, for example, that thought Bored Ape Yacht Club looked good, right? And you kind of get to the understanding that, oh my God, there is so many people with such a wide-ranging variety of tastes and opinion, and there's probably like a lot more money than actual sense or appreciation or and look at it gravitate to things that really don't push any sort of envelope, right? It's probably why so many live, love, laugh things get sold. It's probably why, all of this $100 like Target or Walmart house art gets made and sold. It's, something that is very like easy and digestible, ultimately becomes very safe and acceptable to people.
When I was very young in like elementary school, my elementary school had this program called Art Soup, where a smattering of parents would come in and they would give a short lesson on an artist and their artwork, and then everyone would like go recreate a version of that artwork. And I remember one of the very first One of these art soups was a Jackson Pollock art soup, and I must have been 7 years old. And I was like, I get this. I can make this. And then as you went on, you would have artists with talents who a 7 to 9 year old could not emulate so easily. I would just always devolve back to Jackson Pollock, and I would splatter, paint and finger paint and watercolors onto a page and say, no, Jackson Pollock is the way. Right. I'm going to try and connect that to what we were talking about, but like very easy, digestible, simple for even a child to understand, to look at just this assortment of colors and say, like, I can create that. I understand it. Like, at least in that moment, right? For whatever lens that I was bringing to the artwork, I got it. And I just kept wanting to return to it. And the things that were outside of my ability to kind of like understand, and by understand in this circumstance, I mean recreate, I was less interested in. I wanted to return again to like what was for me safe and comprehensible. I think that's why we have a tough time. Like we can even go back to like Bob Dylan going electric, right? When Bob Dylan went electric, suddenly like his work could not be fit into like a very easily comprehensible box, right? Now there were these eras of Bob Dylan. We have to, judge thing A versus thing B as previously there's pre-electric era versus post-electric era, and it made the whole thing much more difficult to kind of comprehend. I don't know if there's a specifically good example of that in crypto art. Well, I guess there is, or at least the one that comes to the top of mind is like when Matt Cain did Contractual Obligations, which was all about like what is it to own a Matt Cain? What is a Matt Cain? And it was much harder to fit a Matt Cain in a box after that performance than it was previously. And I think a lot of people were obviously put, for a lot of reasons, were rubbed the wrong way or were rubbed in a new way by that.
I'm gonna just can I real quick just
Yeah.
it was the in kind of line with that. It was the introduction of the idea, I think, of like open editions and then one of X, and then like how do we begin to put this in more hands, that really began to open Pandora's box to question what this was. But once that is like opened is when you can't put it back in, right? Because it's very easy to say, on when they're selling one of ones or one of tens, that this is rare, this is limited. But at the end of the day, it's digital and it yearns to be abundant, and it doesn't actually fit in all of that previous way in which art was bought and sold based on scarcity.
Yeah, we're literally in art's electric era.
Wait, but we were talking about making what it did for the rare pass, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but the whole, I mean, but you see, this is like what you were talking about, Bob Dylan. That's precisely what Matt tried to prove. You can't expect one thing from an artist, because if you pay an X amount of money, that it has to look like a Matt Cain, that it's gonna look like this instead. And he played perfectly because he was given the chance of a rare pass where you buy and you don't know what you get. And so you know what, like you're gonna get something that you don't expect, because this is like, we talked about this once when I was, I don't remember, maybe like a Colborne's church. But the fact that artists become slaves of their own styles, because otherwise because they become slaves of their own styles because they become slaves of the market. It's like the prices are so pumped and so fake and pushed to the edge that then if I pay 1 million for this, I expect exactly this. And if you change the style, and if Bob Dylan went like electric, I mean, maybe he had a reason to do that. And then if an artist wants to experiment with something else, which is pretty much what they should constantly do, that they cannot do it because the market expects something else. So that's what he did. So to your point of Bob Dylan and like Pollock, no, it's a new problem. This is a new problem, to expect a Matt Cain that looks like a Matt Cain it's like a big problem.
And
It's a commercial thing. It's a homogeneity thing. It's not. It's like reducing volatility and having expectations of the world that these people are producers, and they're producers in the way that we know corporations to be, right? And this, I think, is why PFPs were so popular, because they all fit in this box. And suddenly, whereas it was like experimentalists and avant-garde and all sorts of weird out there people, well, how do we get to the masses? Let's put them in an exclusive box and say that, oh, this is like the cool kids club. No, now it's lemurs, or now it's yeah, whatever. And that was part of the mental shift in trying to expand it. It really got brought down.
Well, this is the issue, or one of the issues that we get without having proper criticism, right? Is like, without there being some kind of critical lens applied to like an artist's first second era, right? Or to PFP collections relationship to the culture. Without a critical lens on top of that, you're allowing the market to come in and act as its own critic. And in the same way that these, Bored Ape Yacht Club looked a lot better when it was worth $100,000 and how it looked when it was worth $100, we saw the same thing with Matt Cain, to tie those two things together, right? When the contractual obligations first dropped, people were not super happy about it. Once each of those pieces climbed to a 3.5, 4 ETH floor price, suddenly they were a lot cooler. Suddenly they looked a lot better. People were a lot more ready to have a conversation about it. But the market's whims are so much more randomized, right? They are inherently without context, right? Because they're responsive.
I would push almost back on that and say the market is actually, well, I don't know. This is a question. Is the market inherently irrational, or is it perfectly rational? Is it actually capturing all of like the desires and feelings of the participants that are in the market? If something goes up, doesn't that mean that it's valued?
Well, it's rational, but it has very strong motivations towards certain actions. So like Matt Cain, his work was brilliant, and so it gets this floor price. But could anyone who wasn't at the level of notoriety of Matt Cain achieve that? So like, all of these PFP collections that just blew up the market in 2021, like they all were being judged under the same kind of quasi-critical lens, but the ones that had ingrained notoriety, ingrained kind of attention, had a much greater chance of like receiving the market's, I don't know, praise or blessing. So like, yes, there's a logic to it, but that logic is not fairly distributed in the way that I think ideal criticism is fairly distributed. That like ideal criticism is going to inspire its own discoverability because it's looking to apply a broader and broader and broader context, because that's the critic's own market generated demand, is to incorporate more, is to be even more insightful, is to find new lenses. Eleanor, do you think I'm full of shit, or do you see what I'm saying?
No. I'm following. I mean, I'm thinking. Yeah.
I guess the point is just that like perhaps the market is a good aggregator, but my opinion or my first instinct is like, fuck that. I don't think the market is a better, rather, even if it's a better like denotation of value, like I'm an art writer, so I want to be better than the market. And I think we are all artists, and we want to be judged by people who we can talk to and dissect and understand than this perhaps irrational machine that we can't control. It's just, it's too hard. It's too philosophically dirtying to rely on market mechanisms to be the de facto judge of quality.
This is why so many were here to begin with. And that's really inherent conflict also, is we wanted to break free from the masses, right? We wanted to express ourselves in ways that were non-conforming, right? Mm-hmm. And capital markets brings everybody back to the idea of like productivity and efficiency and labor. You're not a human. You are just an input for labor, and you are incredibly, for the most part, expendable. and you realize that very quick, participating in anything crypto, that there is always going to be somebody that is more perpetually online. You are always like going to there's going to be somebody who's faster, there's going to be somebody who's there more. So what is your advantage? And also, like, you're competing with 5x the number of bots. So we also have this existential like bot threat. So we're in it. We know these pressures, and the idea was to like kind of move through crypto into an expression of humanity in a technological era. But we keep running up against this wall of everything that is so much bigger and structural than the idea of ourselves. And we're saying, like, we want to compete as individuals against this structure by decentralizing and aggregating all of our individual power into some sort of fluid decentralized mechanism.
Can we?
I increasingly, I think no.
Well, you and I were talking about this the other day, like off camera, just talking about like the difficulty in maintaining values when something scales, right? Like CryptoArt's values and its like decentralized nature and its fluidity were really easy to keep, or it seemed to me as if they were much easier to keep straight and keep kind of like focused on when there were 200 people here. But when there's 2,000, 20,000, 200,000, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep the same thing front of mind, right? You just have so many more vectors by which that value can be dissolved and diffused.
But that's the real challenge, though. I mean, we all know all like underground movements. It was easier. I mean, it's always the same story. It's just very old story. So the real challenge is how do you keep it real when and reach out to the masses or like to a higher number of people. That's what I have been struggling the entire time because I unfortunately believe in both. That is a problem. Like we discussed this with Colburn a lot. Like I believe in underground, but then I am too sad that the underground is not on the ground. And so I do everything I can to bring it here, but then it happens what happened. And then I don't know anymore. So that's the challenge.
Well, people, I think, pretty frequently make the comparison of crypto art to punk rock, which I think, as a cautionary tale, is actually pretty apt, right? Punk rock was very underground and very extreme and very not for the masses. And when like the Sex Pistols started to make it big, and when bands like Black Flag started to be listened to people like me, who's not a punk rocker, well, the game was already up. It couldn't maintain that same kind of like cutting edge placement because there were too many other vectors by which these things were being sent through to destroy whatever its values were in the beginning. I want to bring up a comment from Bard Janssen, who we're happy to have, who said there's so much art to put context around. How do critics keep up? Do we need a funding model for critical analysis? And I'm curious, Eleonora, do you think it's possible to create a sustainable or even temporarily sustainable funding model for critical analysis or critical thought in general?
Well, first we have to start because there's so much art to criticize, but we're not doing it. So before creating any model, I think, but it's true. And then so we should start because only by doing it, then you can, like realize that it is too centralized. It is too like, the voices are too few. It's like 3 4 people. It's not okay. So how can we expand it? And so I don't know how to create a model for our criticism since it is inexistent. So I wish at least we had to solve this problem. Like, oh, we only have a few people doing this, and they're too like powerful, and this power should be distributed to more voices and opinions. I wish we had this problem, but we don't have that yet. Also, like even in the past, I remember even like once I think it was Jason Bailey. We were talking about like decentralized ways of curating, and I think that he was proposing, like maybe at least like an algorithm who would that would like bring up artworks in platforms based on, just like any other parameter, which is not money, for instance. So like, to have like different algorithms and this and that. But it seems like all these kind of like attempts always failed a little bit because it is too detached from the humans. And then you go back to even like push even further this we are online, digital and quick thing. You push it even farther. So it's probably better, I'm saying better, to have like a few people than just to have another system where everyone you it's very difficult topic where you don't want to go to. Let's give the power to those who know what they're talking about. I don't think that nobody here knows what they're talking about because the space is very new. So that's a positive point. uh, but then I was in projects where artworks were given in the hands of the public and everyone could vote. And so you have artists and like people calling other people. And so the more followers someone has, or the more people you call, and your artwork wins. It's so bad. So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if this is better. Uh, so to answer Bard, who I say hello to, I think we should start somewhere and then we can think about models.
Sure, I agree. It's you think about like the traditional like academic model, right? And it's like academic institutions aren't making their money. They're not sustaining themselves via, the kinds of art criticism that they're encouraging and producing, but it kind of raises their stature in certain realms, right? They're trying to like raise their stature in all these different areas, so they're encouraging research and such. But that's of course extremely gatekept. It's almost as if, the idea of patronage as we've traditionally understood it, where you have some kind of like wealthy patron who wants to create art or wants to see art created, and so they, take artists under their wing and they financially support them so they can create art. Perhaps that's not necessary anymore. Perhaps what we need is patrons for art critics. And I don't just say that because I try and be an art critic. Although I would accept any patrons that are listening. But
Well,
like,
in this article that I was reading, there was something also interesting. They were defining the art critic as art critic is a pain in the ass. It's
yeah.
actually not a product of institutions. It's against institution, because the art critic can basically like fundamentally by default cannot stand the system around what they are criticizing, which I find myself in this position so much because I know what I am criticizing, that I cannot stand it. Like I'm always angry. I'm always like, no, like, and so the art critique then is not something coming from like an institutional actually like model. It is so much into it because they're living in that time and the system, but they're annoyed by it. They see like everything that doesn't work. It's very interesting, in fact. It's like,
That is a really interesting point.
Yeah, it's contradictory and it's very frustrating.
yeah.
I think that that's a really good place to end our conversation today, because I'd love to just like ruminate on that point, and I'd love for everyone else to ruminate on that point, because we could go for another 50 minutes, as is often the case on this podcast. Eleonora, before we kind of get out of here, would you like to just take the floor and tell our listeners kind of what you have going on, or anything that they should know, or where they can find you, etc.?
No, I mean, it's exciting times. I'm gonna talk about something different. I am working on a project that, and I am taking care of the art part, but it's something very different because it's going to be, if it works, it's going to be the new, I don't know how to say in English, WWF.
The
So
World Wildlife Fund or the World Wrestling Federation?
no wrestling, it's the animals.
Oh,
It's
gotcha.
the animals.
And so we're like, it's a profitable nonprofit, which means that like they make profit to create non-profitable things. And I am very excited to participate in these new models where the blockchain is going to be used to acquire lands all over the world and create oases of animals and oases of like also like cultures have in the oasis so that it becomes sustainable for local people, and all of this is through blockchain. uh, so for instance, like if you acquire a piece of land and you have 10,000 stakeholders, if the government becomes corrupted in the future, you cannot, like, you have to get 10,000 people to agree to actually sell the piece of land where you created the oasis. So it's basically safe. And also to create like these hubs for culture and art around these oases for local people to work locally and to, like, and many other things. But anyways, like, I'm very excited. I'm like, we're doing the first project in Colombia, because Colombia is the place in the world with the biggest biodiversity, and like Sierra Nevada, like geologically speaking, there is everything that you can find in the rest of the world. And so we're starting from there and like creating oasis, and I'm recruiting artists from Colombia to create artworks, and because we are going to sell these memberships for people to go. So there's something different to talk about. Otherwise, all these art things. That I'm
That's wonderful. I love the idea of weaponizing people's initial interest in decentralized like participation and then their inability to actually participate in decentralized participation for something good. I think that's genius. Colborn, any last words for us before we get out of here?
No, that was exciting. I've done a lot of this type of work before, Eleonora. So let me know if I can help. And we have a lot of dear artist friends in Colombia.
Okay.
And I because my mother tried to call while we were on this, I thought of an outro line for us, and it can be "Mo, call your mother."
We'll prototype that in just a few minutes here.
Yeah, hit the people with it. See if they do it.
I do just want to thank everyone who is in the chat. This is like 3 or 4 weeks in a row of having people here with us, which is really exciting. So thank you, Vento, Easy and Crypto, Niels Brosat, 16 Crutchfield, Andre Stelvecchio, Bard Janssen, of course. I think that's everybody. We really appreciate you being here with us. We appreciate you, Eleonora, being here with us. Colborn, I appreciate you. We all appreciate you as always. If you liked what you heard today, please give the MOCA Live podcast a like, follow, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. And please follow our Substack at museumofcrypto.substack.com. From myself, Eleonora, and Colborn, we'd like to say thank you so long. And don't forget to call your mother.
More call your mother.
Mo call.
Mo call someone.
Call.
Yeah, Mo call somebody.
Yeah, find someone you love and give them a call.
Give them a Mo call.
And then tell us how it went in the chat next week. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see